There's a list. Every smuggler knows it. Worlds you don't land on, no matter what. Not because of patrols, not because of customs, because of what's actually down there. Thessera Vex is at the top of that list. Has been for 200 years. Both the Terran Authority and the Vael High Council flagged it in the same way, which, if you know anything about how often these two agree on things, should tell you everything you need to know. Nobody goes to Thessera Vex. I went to Thessera Vex. My name is Cole Ashford, Independent Transport, which is a polite way of saying I move things people don't want moved through channels people don't want them moved through. 7 years in the business, mostly successful, which in my line of work means mostly alive. 3 days before I ended up on Thessera Vex, I had taken a job from a man named Drevik, which was the first mistake. The second mistake was not checking what was actually in the cargo containers before I agreed to move them. The third mistake, and this one wasn't really my fault, was a Vael patrol ship deciding my unmarked transport looked exactly like the kind of unmarked transport we're chasing. I lost the chase, lost the engine, lost most of my navigation. What I didn't lose was a planet to crash into. Lucky me. Atmospheric entry on a damaged ship is not an experience I'd recommend. My ship, the Wandering Dead, which I name ironically and was now regretting, came down through Thessera Vex's atmosphere in a long, ugly arc that ended with several trees, a rock formation, and roughly 11 seconds of being absolutely certain I was about to die. I didn't die. The ship, on the other hand, was finished. I knew it before I even unstrapped from the pilot seat. The kind of a damage that doesn't get fixed, only salvaged. I got the hatch open, and I climbed out onto Thessera Vex for the first time. The sky was wrong. Purple and orange, bruised looking, with 2 moons visible even in daylight. The air was breathable, that was something, but thick, humid, full of smells I didn't have names for. Vegetation everywhere, dense and alien, in shades of green I'd never seen on any cataloged world. Everything was too big. The trees, the leaves, the strange fungal growths climbing the rock formations, and everywhere, wreckage. Ships, dozens of them, in every direction, in every state of decay. Some looked recent, some looked like they had been there for a century, swallowed by vegetation, barely recognizable as ships at all. 200 years of crashes. 200 years of people who ended up exactly where I was standing. None of them had gotten off this planet. I checked my comms. Dead. Not damaged, just no signal, like the planet itself was swallowing the transmission. I checked my supplies. 3 days of rations, a sidearm with 11 charges, a multi-tool, and a med kit. I had no idea. Yet the wreckage wasn't the dangerous part. The sound started about 20 minutes after I began walking. I decided to head toward what looked like higher ground. A ridge, maybe 2 kilometers away, which might give me an advantage point and might have better comm signal. It was a plan with approximately 0 information behind it. But it was a plan, and having a plan felt important. The sound was low, a kind of resonant thrum that I felt in my chest before I consciously heard it. It was coming from behind me. I turned around. There was something moving through the vegetation about 50 meters back. Big. Bigger than anything I wanted to be near. I caught a glimpse of dark plated hide, too many legs, and a head built mostly around a mouth. I did the math very quickly. The math was bad. I ran. Running through alien jungle with no idea of the terrain is not a strategy. It barely even a tactic. I went over a route I didn't see, went down hard, came up with my sidearm out and pointing at empty air because whatever had been making that sound was no longer where I'd last seen it, which was worse. The thrumming sound was closer now, coming from multiple directions. I realized, with the specific clarity that comes right before something goes very wrong, that I had run toward it instead of away from it. Then something hit me from the side, hard, fast, knocking me off my feet and into the underbrush. And my first thought was that I was already dead. My second thought, a half a second later, was that whatever had hit me wasn't attacking. It was tackling me out of the way. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and came up looking at a creature, the source of the thrumming, exactly where I had been standing a moment before. Up close, it was worse than the glimpse. 6 legs, plated hide, a mouth that opened in 3 directions. Between me and it stood someone who definitely wasn't human. She was tall, not Vael tall, but taller than me, with deep green-gray skin patterned in darker malted markings that I'd later understand were natural camouflage, perfectly suited to the jungle around us. Sharp, angular features, eyes that glowed faint amber, the kind of eyes built for seeing in low light. She wore practical gear, scavenged leather, worked metal, the unmistakable look of someone who'd built their equipment from whatever the wrecks around her had left behind. She had a spear, and she was using it. What followed was about 90 seconds of the most efficient violence I'd ever seen. The creature was fast and armored and clearly used to winning. She was faster and knew exactly where it wasn't armored. It went down. She made sure it stayed down. Then she turned to look at me. I want to be honest about this moment because it matters for what comes later. My first thought was not fear, and it was not gratitude, even though both of those would have been reasonable. My first thought was, she's been watching my ship since it came down. Because nobody finds you that fast on an alien planet unless they already know exactly where to look. She said something, a language I didn't recognize, low and clipped, with an edge that I understood even without the translation. It wasn't friendly. It was the tone you use when you're deciding whether something is a problem you need to deal with. I held very still and kept my hands visible. She looked at me for a long moment, then at the wreckage of my ship, visible through the trees behind me, then back at me. She said something else, shorter, and gestured sharply, unmistakably, toward the wreckage. Go back. That much I understood. I didn't move, partly because I wasn't sure my legs would cooperate yet, partly because the thrumming sound, multiple sources, I realized hadn't stopped. Whatever I had run into wasn't the only thing in these woods, and it wasn't alone. She heard them too, and I watched her amber eyes track the sound, watched her body shift from the alert but controlled stance of someone who had just won a fight to something tighter, more urgent. Whatever was coming, one of it had been bad enough. More than one was a different problem. She looked at me again, and I saw her doing the same math I'd done, except she had information I didn't. She knew what was coming. She knew the terrain. She knew, almost certainly, exactly how bad this was about to get. She made a decision. I watched it happen. A kind of resigned recalculation, the expression of someone choosing the lesser of two problems. She grabbed my arm, strong, no argument in the grip, and pulled me to my feet. Pointed, not towards my wreckage this time, toward the ridge I'd originally been trying to reach. Then she ran. I ran after her, because the alternative was staying where I was, and staying where I was had a clock on it. I could hear it getting closer. What followed was the hardest run of my life. She moved through the jungle like it was something she'd memorized. Every root, every gap in the canopy, every patch of ground that looked solid but wasn't. I followed as best I could, falling behind, catching up, falling behind again. The things behind us were closing. I caught glimpses through the trees, multiple sets of the same six-legged shape, moving fast, coordinated in a way that made my skin crawl. Pack hunters. Of course they were pack hunters. Of course the ones she'd killed had been calling for backup the entire time. We hit the base of the ridge with maybe 30 meters of lead. The slope was steep, too steep to run up, barely climbable. She started up it anyway, finding handholds I couldn't see, moving fast. I followed. The pack hit the base of the ridge about 10 seconds after we cleared the first ledge. I heard them. Didn't look down. Climbing took everything I had. We made it to a rock overhang maybe 15 meters up. Too high for the creatures below to reach, narrow enough that we could see the whole approach. She turned, planted her spear, and looked down at the pack circling below with an expression that, even across the species gap, I recognized. Frustration. The specific frustration of a problem that's been delayed, not solved. Then she looked at me. And for the first time, she really looked at me. Not as a threat, not as an obstacle, as a problem she was now stuck with. The pack didn't leave, not that night. We were stuck on that overhang until they lost interest or we found another way down. And from the way Lyra, I didn't have her name yet, but I'm using it now because it makes this easier, settled in against the rock, checking her supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. I got the sense lost interest might take a while. Night on Thessera Vex was loud. The jungle didn't quiet down. If anything, it got louder, a layered chorus of sounds I had no names for, occasionally interrupted by something large moving through the canopy below. I sat with my back against the rock, sidearm in my lap, and tried not to think too hard about how far I was from anything resembling help. Lyra sat a few meters away, watching the dark. Occasionally her eyes would track something I couldn't see or hear, and I'd watch her shoulders tense, then relax. At some point she said something, quiet, not directed at the jungle this time. I looked at her. She gestured at herself, then at me, then at the jungle, and made a flat, leveling motion with her hand. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the gesture. We're stuck with each other, for now. I nodded. Then, because it felt important, I tapped my chest. Cole, I said. She looked at me for a long moment, then tapped her own chest. Lyra. It wasn't friendship. Not yet. It wasn't even trust. Not really. More like the kind of provisional non-aggression that happens when two people realize the thing trying to kill them doesn't care which of them it gets first. But it was something. A name. A starting point. I had no idea, sitting on that ridge with a stranger from a species I'd never heard of, surrounded by 200 years of other people's bad luck, that this was the beginning of anything. I thought it was just one more bad day in a long line of bad days. I was wrong about that. I'd be wrong about a lot of things over the months that followed. But that first night, all I knew was the sun was coming up, the pack was finally moving off, and the woman next to me, whatever else she was, had saved my life twice in 12 hours without owing me anything. That had to mean something. I just didn't know what yet. This is the part of the story where I'm supposed to tell you it gets easier. It doesn't. Thessera Vex doesn't get easier. You get better at it, if you survive long enough. But the planet itself never stops being exactly what it is. A place that has killed everyone who's ever landed on it for 200 years without exception. Until us. What I didn't know that first night, what neither of us knew, was that the reason Thessera Vex had killed everyone who ever landed here wasn't just the predators, or the terrain, or the storms I learn about soon enough. It was protecting something. Something buried. Something old. Something that had been waiting under the surface of this planet for longer than human or Vael civilization had existed. Lyra knew more about that than she let on that first night. I'd learn why later, but that morning all I knew was that I was alive. I had an ally I couldn't talk to, and I was a very, very long way from anywhere I was supposed to be. My name is Cole Ashford. This is the story of how I ended up staying on the one planet in the galaxy nobody wants, and why, eventually, I wouldn't have left even if I could.